coordinated way against a variety of targets on the ground, the kinds of things we've seen, we've done ourselves. That's what we're talking about here.
Also making news, pro-Palestinian protesters set fire to the wall of the Israeli embassy in Mexico City this week in response to Sunday's strike on Rafah. Around 200 demonstrators clashed with riot police outside the compound on Tuesday as they gathered to denounce the genocide of Palestinians in Gaza. Mexico has filed a declaration of intervention with the World Court supporting South Africa's genocide case against Tel Aviv. It's still not known what caused this month's helicopter crash that killed both Iran's president alongside the nation's defence minister. The General Staff of Iran's armed forces has already ruled out sabotage, as well as any maintenance issues. It's understood authorities are now investigating whether the weather played a part. In brief, Florida's Board of Education has passed a new rule ensuring that high school sports are separated by a student's biological sex and not their gender identity. And Ukraine says it's already using long-range missiles supplied by Britain to strike targets deep inside Russian territory. This has been Matt Boyland with your TNT News Brief, but we'll be back with more at the top of the next hour.
Well, a very warm welcome to the Muckrakers. It's Thursday and it's Andrew Eborn here. And this is the show where we strip the day's big talking points down to their bare bones and devour the red meat of pure debate as we focus on the stories that matter to you wherever you're listening or watching from around the world. And boy, have we got an exciting show for you today. We're going to be discussing Keir Starmer's policy speech on Bank Holiday Monday. We're going to unpack his 6 steps. What do they mean to you? Let me know. And what can be done to save the NHS? Is it salvable? We're going to talk about that as well. But there are 4 programs: digital identity, central bank digital currency, Agenda 2030, and the pandemic treaty, each of which will fundamentally and perhaps irreversibly change the social contract between the UK citizen and the UK state. Yet not one of the major political parties are discussing them in the election campaign. Why is that? And what else should they be discussing? You let me know. And finally, my good friend Diane Abbott. Whatever happened to her? Well, everybody's having a pop at her as they did at Jeremy Corbyn. She says she's going to stand in the general election by any means possible. What does that mean? Well, I'll tell you what, I want to hear your voices as well as my wonderful guests. Do get in touch. And this is how you can do it.
Our lines are open. From the U.S. and Canada, call 1-888-201-6425. From the U.K., call 033-0024-1026. And from Australia and New Zealand, call 1-800-670-310. Free speech is alive and well on today's News Talk, TNT Radio.
Free speech is indeed alive and well. And I always say that people complain that they never have a platform in which to air their voice. Well, this is that very platform. Do get on the phone. We've had some brilliant callers over the last couple of weeks. It's great to hear from you anywhere in the world. Do give us a call. And if you've got any thoughts on today's topics, or even if you want to raise something completely different, do get in touch. Well, I'm delighted. It's not just me, Andrew Eborn, all on the Todd, and joined by 2 titans of TNT yet again. The wonderful bologna for the sandwich, James Freeman and Rick Munn. How are you, gentlemen?
Yeah, good.
I'm good. I'm good. So
You're
far,
good.
so good, Andrew. Let's keep it that way. What do you say?
Well, I don't know. We've got to unpack talking about sandwiches. Keir Starmer's speech, did you hear it on Bank Holiday Monday? And people are sort of saying it's lacking substance. He comes up with his 6 steps. It's rather like the AA. They have 12 steps to recovery. He's got 6. What did you make of his speech? Let's start with you, James.
I think the first thing is country first, party second. So says Sir Keir Starmer. But just over a year ago, he was doing an interview with Emily Maitlis, where he said Westminster is a talking shop, a place of conflict where nothing gets done. Davos is a place you can engage with people you can see yourself working with in the future. It's clear who Keir Starmer reports to, just like our unelected Prime Minister, Rishi Sunak. He would much rather be working with the globalists and cutting us and Westminster out of the equation. Undemocratic and just a global puppet, I think. He's the right cheek of the uni party, two cheeks of the same arse, Andrew.
Yeah, I love it. George Galloway always seems to sneak in to every single one of our programs. It's what George Galloway said. It's basically two cheeks of the same backside, is what he said. And that's the difference between the political parties. But it was really interesting, wasn't it, Rick? Because people would say after how long Keir's been in the public eye, they must have known him by now. But he talked about his childhood and how he used to make pocket money from clearing the stones from the local farmers, and he played football with cows and so on and so forth. Do you buy it all from Keir Starmer?
I do actually, because I'll tell you why. He's talking crap, and I buy that he's a bullshitter. Okay, so yes, I do buy it. I do buy that he played football with a cow and he maybe collected stones as a kid, but that's not something that you and I would want to boast about, maybe running in a general election. And let me just say this. I'm looking at the transcript for the entire Keir Starmer speech, and I just want to focus on the first two sentences. That tells you all you need to know about Keir Starmer. So think about the great speeches, the great orators of history. Think about the Gettysburg Address. Think about Martin Luther King's I Have a Dream speech. Think about Winston Churchill talking about fighting people on the beaches. This is the first two sentences of Keir Starmer's speech. Thank you all for coming here on a bank holiday Monday. At least we're by the seaside. That's how Keir Starmer chose to blast off. I mean, that just tells me everything I need to know about Sir Keir Starmer.
Well, I'll tell you what, he does go on. There's some wonderful rhetoric later on, and I think we've got Chat GPT to contribute a little bit to this, because he says we are at a dangerous new point, close to crossing a Rubicon on trust, not just in politics, but in so many of the institutions that are meant to serve and protect the British people. And he was talking last week when Rishi made the big announcement about July the 4th, and that's when the fireworks. Obviously, two major stories got pushed down the news agenda, and that was about the post office scandal and the blood scandal. And all the people have been waiting for years and years and years to get justice. Rishi Sunak, by calling the election, stole their thunder, didn't he, James?
Well, I don't know about that. I mean, look, Sir Keir Starmer, I don't think the public have got any time for him. He's not a popular politician. I think, people are only going to vote for Labour in such numbers because of the absolute shambles that we've had over the past 4 years. But, Rishi Sunak, he was on the front page of the Times newspaper this morning with saying, back me, and you will get lower interest rates. What's he on about? I really don't. I mean, the Bank of England Monetary Policy Committee is responsible for lowering interest rates. The bank is supposed to be independent. Where Rishi gets off saying that, I do not know. And also, the other thing to bear in mind here is that whilst he's saying I'll lower interest rates, which he can't, and put more money in your pocket, him as Chancellor froze all of the income tax thresholds until I think 2027, and Jeremy Hunt has extended that by another 2 years. So, he's saying I'll give you some money back via a mechanism which he has no control over, while continuing to take from the other hand. Absolute full of nonsense.
Well, it is. Well, I'll tell you what, let's unpack those 6 steps, because it won't take long. His first one was, as you say, about economic stability. And he's sort of turning around and saying, look, the taxes under the Tories, it's been hitting every working family to the tune of £5,000. He's talking about national insurance. He's complaining that Rishi Sunak wants to get rid of national insurance. He says that's going to cost 46 billion. But they're talking about stability, but there's not much detail there, is there, Rick?
No, but I used to work in financial services, and when I did business with a client, they did a big investment. One of my old managers told me, he says, "Keep yourself right, Rick. Be suitably vague when it comes to writing down what your advice was, in case it comes back to bite you in the ass." So I think Keir Starmer is being suitably vague when he comes to making these comments, Andrew. He's not nailing anything down. He's leaving it a little bit fluffy around the edges, and for very, very good reason. And there's a comment that I've written down here just listening to you talk about how the rhetoric improved as his speech went on. I call this pick and mix politics. Okay, so back in the day when Woolworths was a thing, you might have went in and you saw this big rack of sweets, and you like the strawberry sorbet sweets, but you don't like licorice, all sorts, so you just fill your bag with the things that you like. Well, I think Starmer is indulging in pick and mix politics when it comes to the construction of these speeches, telling us the things that we might want to hear, while conveniently leaving off national scandals like the blood thing and the post office thing and God knows what else is coming up through the works at the minute. So yeah, I think we need to take what he says with a hefty dose of salt.
Well, I remember those pick and mix. I remember the what was it, the lemon sherbets, which used to lacerate your tongue. So we worked on that sort of basis. But talking about lacerating tongues and going to doctors and things, his step 2 was about the NHS, which everybody's been talking about. Strikes are going to be happening from the junior doctors, basically in the days leading up to the election. One of his promises, he's going to cut NHS waiting times by 40,000 extra appointments every week, paid for by cracking down on tax avoidance and non-doms. What do you make of that, James?
I think really you have to put some context around that. Over the past 40 years, the Uni Party, both the Conservatives and the Labour Party, have presided over wrecking the NHS. We've seen the number of doctors and nurses per head of population going down. We're at the bottom of the tables for that internationally now. Of course, Labour famously loaded £80 billion worth of debt burden on the NHS via PFIs. And only about 30 billion of that has been paid off so far. So part of the reason the NHS is in the absolute dire mess it's in is partly responsible from Labour. The other thing is, Labour voted through all of the policies, test and trace, and all the other garbage that we saw over the past 4 years, which has added to the burden of the NHS. And, pissed, sorry to swear, but they've pissed the money up the wall, which could have been spent on the NHS. So I just think it's empty rhetoric. As usual, you need to ask the real questions, not listen to the answers they're trying to give to you.
Okay, step 3, we will launch a new border security command with new specialist investigators, new resources and new powers, including counter-terrorism powers. I mean, this is one of the things that I've been banging on about, small boats is one of Rishi's 5 points. And I always say you've got to focus on the criminal gangs that basically lead to this horrendous trade in the first place. What are your views, Rick?
Well, talking about new task forces, talking about bringing new things in, why not just make the things that are there actually work and function and do what they're supposed to do? So at the minute, you have the RNLI, you have Border Force, or some people call it Border Farce, in operation. Right. And you also have the Royal Navy that are effectively acting as water taxis a lot of the times, picking up people that the French Navy are dropping off at the halfway point and ferrying them back over here to the UK. So rather than coming up with new institutions and brainstorming what we could do differently, how about just making the institutions work the way they're supposed to work, instead of coming up with new think tanks and new ideas and undoubtedly more governmental departments that will oversee said policies. So, make sure prevention is better than cure. So let's stop the problem rather than trying to cure it, because they seem to be like a big pharma organization. They don't want people to be healed, because a patient healed is a customer lost. So it could be the same principle applying to people coming across in the so-called small boats.
No, you're absolutely right. And prevention is indeed better than cure. And I think that's one of the things we should look at. We're going to do this later on in the show about how do you solve a problem like the NHS. I'm sure there is an Andrew Lloyd Webber musical there somewhere. But it is interesting. The whole Rwanda thing, the small boats thing, has basically populated and polluted the media for so long with will he, won't he get one single person off to Rwanda in that sort of policy. He had famously, Rishi Sunak had that bet with Piers Morgan. Piers bet him £1,000 that he wouldn't get a single person there before the general election. Well, the general election's on July the 4th, and Rishi's admitted he's not going to get what anybody knew. Somebody went along voluntarily, but he said that should count. So I think Piers is owed that grand, or it's going to go to the Red Cross, I believe. But it is become a sort of hot potato, and I do think we need to get some sort of success there on that basis. But let me deal with step 4, though. They talk about setting up a great British energy, which is going to be paid for by a windfall tax on the energy giants who made record profits while your bills went through the roof, is what he was saying. There's going to be a new company which is going to be owned by the taxpayer, making money for the taxpayer, harnessing the opportunity of clean British power and making us energy independent, removing Putin's boot from our throat and cutting bills in your home for good. That's what he said on the beaches. What did you make of that, James?
Well, I mean, it sounds like a good idea because it's clear that the UK hasn't had a credible energy policy for years now. We've got the electricity grid telling us that, well, they're paying people not to use their devices at certain periods because they're saying otherwise we might get blackouts. So we are in a bit of a pickle because the government at the same time is trying to encourage everybody to get electric cars. So we do need a credible energy policy, but I'm afraid I don't believe that Labour will deliver it because, they are going to, they're worse than the Conservatives on net zero. I think they're going to be harder on these policies. So I think if you decode what he's actually saying here, what he's actually saying is, we're going to push all of these net zero policies with a turbo boost, I think.
Yes, and turbo boost indeed is what he's talking about. Step 5, we'll crack down on anti-social behaviour. And he's promised 13,000 new officers and community support officers. What do you make of that, Rick?
Okay, again, more talk, promising more cops, bringing in. I'm a big believer in quality over quantity, Andrew. So bringing in 13,000 new police, what are these new police people going to look like, these new policemen, these new policewomen? Are they going to be wearing full makeup and high heels? And that's just the men that I'm talking about. So who are we going to have on the streets here? I saw a clip yesterday, I kid you not, of an attempted arrest of this big strapping man somewhere in Manchester. There must have been 4 or 5 police officers, men and women, trying to arrest him. They were beating him with truncheons. I think they even teased him at one stage, and he was literally pushing them to the side like they were flies around a cow's backside. So the training that's in place at the minute and the caliber of cops that's in place at the minute, on the whole, I would be highly questionable of. I would say, again, rather than recruiting 13,000 more cops, which, let's face it, if they're good quality cops, then well and good. But how about actually training the ones that are there to be able to do their jobs properly, i.e. arrest people effectively and stop crime? I think that would be a better starting point than
you're absolutely right. And what we also need is clarity. At the moment, we seem to have a 2-tiered policing system where they have got powers. We see the various marches right here in the centre of London, where I am, and you see all sorts of crimes being committed under the Terrorism Act, with appropriate banners being held up supporting terrorist organisations, and so on and so forth. But the police seem to do nothing about it. And I think what it is about not getting new laws, but actually enforcing the laws that they've got. But again, I welcome your views. Do let us know what you think at home. Let me just deal finally with step 6 before we go to the break. Basically, step 6, he says, we're going to get 6,500 new teachers, 6,500 new teachers in the classroom, and they're going to be paid for by removing tax breaks on private schools. What do you reckon, James?
I wonder where these new 6,500 teachers are going to come from, because from what I read about the sector at the moment, teachers are leaving in droves because of the utter state of the profession. So, yeah, where are these teachers going to come from? Are these going to be the immigrants coming across the channel? Who knows? But I think, we've already got a recruitment problem within the teaching profession. So how are they going to solve that? I mean, it's just numbers thrown in the air, isn't it?
No, you're absolutely right. And as we said at the very beginning, there's lots of issues that people are not talking about. You have issues at home. Do let us know. We're going to take a quick break, and we're going to be back straight after these messages.
TNT's State of the Nation.
We finally have had some science sanity from a courtroom, as the Portuguese court has ruled that PCR tests for SARS-CoV-2, the virus that causes COVID-19, are 97% inaccurate and unfit for diagnosing the virus. The ruling was based on a case involving 4 German tourists who were quarantined in Portugal when one of the 4 received a false positive test result. Brian, we've only been saying this since March of 2020, and glad the courts have finally caught up.
Yeah. I don't know, Timothy. I feel like the theme right now at this point in 2024 is too little, too late, or welcome to the party. I'm not sure which, but I'll try to be positive.
Tracking global corruption and threats that undermine our security. This is the Muckrakers on today's News Talk, TNT.
It is indeed the Muckrakers with me, Andrew Ebon. I'm joined again by the wonderful James Freeman and Rick Munn, and we're looking at the political landscape and all the promises that are being made. And the NHS is obviously front and centre of those policies with different suggestions. Now, junior doctors in England and Wales, they're going to be staging a 5-day strike in the lead up to the election in their long-running pay dispute with the government. Now, the BMA, their members have voted for a walkout from 7 o'clock on the 27th of June, a week before the election day, and they've asked for a 35% pay rise to make up for what it says is a 15 years of below inflation pay rises. And it's hitting all the headlines over here. We've got the cynical election doctors strike on the Metro, today's Metro, and this is going to basically be the 11th walkout by junior doctors in this dispute after their first strike in March 2023. Labour, however, have promised that they're going to reduce the maximum wait time, basically, so it'll be a maximum of only 18 weeks. And they reckon they can do this by 2029. And basically, they say you're going to eliminate the whole of waiting lists in about 5 years' time. Do you reckon that's practical, James?
I mean, look, it's possible. I guess if you throw enough money at it and reorganize the NHS a bit, because at the moment it's a bit of a bureaucracy. Whether Labour can do this or not is another matter, I think. And again, I'm going to repeat that mantra that I say. Labour are responsible, along with the Tories, for the state that the NHS is in right now. This has been going on for 40 years, reducing the number of beds, reducing the number of doctors and nurses, and loading the organisation up with debt. The other thing to mention is the Health and Social Care Act that was passed in 2022, which is the final jigsaw of the puzzle to privatise the NHS. They've set up integrated care boards across the UK, which essentially are going to be run by private healthcare providers, where denial of service or care is where they get their profit from. So Labour are all on board with this plan, this long-term plan to privatise the NHS. All the bits are already in place. So I think I don't believe anything that either party say about the NHS.
But you have to look, I mean, they're going to say they reduce it by 18 weeks or to a maximum of 18 weeks. The real question is, again, you need to put meat on the bone. How are they going to do that? They're going to make doctors work longer, which in and of itself will put a strain already on the massively strained NHS. One of the things I've always advocated is the use of artificial intelligence, or the greater use of artificial intelligence, because it's not just about waiting times. It's about the quality of a service that people get. And there was a wonderful survey done in the University of California. I think it was in San Diego. And what they turned around and said is, look, chatting to Chat GPT was better than chatting to your GP, because it was more empathetic. It had more time, it had more access to information, so it could be more accurate in terms of diagnosis and helping and listening to people. What do you think of that, Rick? Do you reckon that's the way forward?
Well, let's be honest about it. When most people go to a GP these days, that's assuming you can actually get an appointment. Most of us have been on the internet beforehand, and Google's a very powerful thing. So you'll probably have diagnosed yourself rather successfully with whatever's wrong with you before you see a doctor. And one of the first questions doctors ask these days is, well, Andrew, what do you think it is? You're telling me you're sick. Yes. What do you think it is? And you'll tell the doctor, and they'll probably scratch his chin, Google it himself, and then say, I think you're right. I'm going to refer you on to a consultant consultant, i.e. a proper doctor. And ironically, I was going to make this comment earlier on a little bit tongue in cheek, but if they want to generate another 40,000 GP appointments per week, what that will do is it will send more people to the already overburdened consultants, and the waiting lists will actually get worse and not better. So maybe to keep the figures right, they should stop people from seeing their GPs, and that'll reduce the waiting list, because people are just starting to die off, Andrew, under national causes. And it's not good for people personally, but it helps with the stats, don't you think?
Oh no, it is very, very worrying. Lies, damn lies, and statistics, and this is what they do. It's always a political hot potato, and we don't seem to find a solution. But I always believe that prevention is better than cure. We talked about this at the top of the show, and there are so many diseases where, I mean, AI is helping tremendously. It's basically helping people cure diseases that we never thought possible. In addition to that, it's basically data is power. And there are so many things. I'll give you one example. Somebody I'm working with about the BRCA gene and how you can basically help diagnose people's risk in certain families if there's with the BRCA gene about breast cancer. And the more power that you can give for information, at the moment, there's no obligation on family members to disclose that they might have this particular gene, which basically, if you disclose that information, then other family members could get tested earlier and it could prevent that. Do you think we should be sharing data to make sure that you do have that prevention as opposed to waiting till it's too late? What do you think, James?
I'm very, very skeptical. They want to sell all of our data, and they're in the process of doing that at the moment to these private healthcare companies. Look, the way that we solve the problem of the NHS is quite clear. When you look at the league tables, we are at the very, very top of international league tables for how much we actually put into the NHS compared to our GDP. But we're right at the bottom of the things which actually deliver service. So the number of doctors and nurses and beds per head of population. So where's all the money going? It's clear that there's lots of money going in there, but we get really, really poor service back as a result. I think the bureaucracy of the NHS needs to be tackled. That is how we will deliver better care for patients. Not from, I mean, look, AI, I'm sure, has got its place in terms of helping, but it's not going to solve the problem of the NHS. What we need to do is direct the money that is already going in into the right places, the places that actually deliver care, not diversity managers and all of these middle managers that suck up all of this money at the moment.
No, it is interesting. I mentioned that obviously that the doctors are going to be going on this strike. Do you think this is going to shift voting behaviour, Rick?
No, I mean, to be honest with you, Andrew, my take on it is stop whining. If you don't like the pay as a junior doctor, find yourself another job, go and get yourself a different vocation. I can remember back in 1992 when I did my A-levels, a lot of budding medical students were in my school. And when they went to get interviewed by their prospective universities to study medicine, they were always asked, why do you want to be a doctor? Why do you want to join the medical profession? And they all gave the same answer: to help people, to make a difference in society. Why didn't they all just be honest and say, it's for the money, the money, the money? Why not just be honest? Because this isn't an issue about, if they're all in it to help people, well, then the money should just be a secondary thing. And of course, let's look at the long game here, because they play the violin and say, well, as a junior doctor, I'm working really long hours and it's really tough and it's really stressful. Yeah, that's a stepping stone to get to be a GP, or a stepping stone to get to be a consultant. And then you're riding the pigs back all the way into retirement. I have never seen a poor and a destitute doctor, or barrister for that matter, and maybe you could attest to that one too, despite all the hours worked and the stress. No, it's very, very cushy number. Thank you very much. Unless you want to contradict me on that.
You make a very interesting point, and I do think they are vocational. I disagree with you. I do think that a lot of people go into it for the vocational reason. It's not the main thing about the pay and the stress, but also just on barristers, on criminal barristers' side. My area of expertise is intellectual property, so it's different. But the idea, criminal barristers, they went on strike themselves because they said crime doesn't pay, and they did all this. They sort of unpacked that when they were looking for their pay rise, and basically turning around and saying, look, we spend so many hours researching it, we may not get the money till much, much later, and so on and so forth. So from a barrister's point of view, there are lots of poor barristers, and whilst people in the profession have been very successful, and those are always the one that you see sipping their Cristal champagne and eating lark's tongue in aspic, there are those who are, it's better, they say, to be a barrister barrister, making coffee for somebody, a barista rather than a barrister. So work on that sort of basis. It is interesting though, and we need to do what I like about this show is that we do unpack these things. We shine a spotlight and work on that sort of basis. More lights, less heat about pay conditions and things like that. But it's not just about the money. The medical profession is creaking at the seams. And the reason it's creaking is the tremendous pressure there is to deliver whilst they're not getting the right sort of funds as well. But let's have a look then. And what do you think the solution would be to reforming the NHS? What do you think, James?
Oh, I think he's frozen on us.
He's frozen. We're going to doctor for that. I'll tell you what, whilst he's frozen,
I'm back.
We can sort about Are you back with us, James?
I'm back.
Welcome. I was just asking
I think you put him into shock, Andrew. You put him into a state of shock when you said that there were poor barristers out there. I think James was saying, did he just say that? Did he just say there's poor barristers out there? He froze.
They probably got phone in. We'll do a reverse charge. We'll accept the call. If you are, I'll tell you what, it'd be really interesting because I want to make sure we always talk about getting to the truth here on TNT, and that's essential. I want to hear all different voices. We always assume we basically have all these assumptions about certain professions, about how they live, and so on and so forth. They're only our views. Your views are the ones that matter as well. Do call in. I know lots of poor barristers, as I say, crime doesn't pay. That used to be what they said, which is why they went out on strike. But just moving away slightly from that, what is then the solution to reforming the NHS? That's what I was asking you, James.
Well, like I said, I think, we need to take the money that we're putting in, the very, very substantial amounts of money that we're putting in, and we need to redirect it to the right places. At the moment, it's not. The NHS is still saddled with, I think it's around 40 to 50 billion of debt from PFIs, which Labour loaded on the service. And we've got all of this middle management, this bureaucracy where the money is going, because it's clear, like I said, from the league tables internationally, that we are one of the countries that put in the most per GDP into our health service. And yet the things which deliver care for people, the number of doctors, nurses and beds per head of population, were right at the bottom of the league tables. And this has slowly been happening over the last 30, 40 years with the Tories and Labour. They're both in cahoots with this. The aim is to privatise the NHS. What more can I say, Andrew?
Well, very interesting point. As you say, look on that sort of principle. What's your solution, Rick?
Listen, the problem with the NHS in a nutshell is bureaucracy / management. Okay, there is no shortage of money being pumped into the NHS. There is no shortage of opportunities for people to enter into that vocation. But of course, when you listen to what the junior doctors are saying, when you listen to the pressure that they're under, a lot of this can be alleviated by proper management. So think of the amount of money that's being squandered on middle managers or high-tier managers in the NHS. Think of the amount of money that's being pumped into diversity training, diversity hires, rainbow crossroads, rainbows painted around the wards of hospital, mixed sex wards as well. There's nothing being done by the management of the NHS, either for the staff and or the patients. So rather than worrying about throwing more money into it, I think what we need to look at is how are we spending the money that is being pumped into it and take it from there.
So
the other thing that I'd like to add Andrew, is the fact, of all of the professions that, support our society and our democracy, I want to question where the doctors were over the last 4 years when, we know thousands of people have been injured. There are countless peer-reviewed studies now showing the harms that have been done by these COVID shots. Where were the doctors? Only a very, very small number were prepared to risk their careers by speaking out. Most doctors have broken the Hippocratic Oath. So, my opinion is they do not deserve a pay rise.
If you're a doctor, or even if you have a view about doctors, do get in touch. We'd like to hear your views. We've looked at a lot of the issues that they are talking about, the politicians. As I mentioned at the top of the show, there are a lot of issues that they're not. I quoted a few: the digital identity, the central bank digital currency, Agenda 2030, and the pandemic treaty. Why do you think they're not addressing these things, Rick?
They're hot potatoes. They've tried to test the water with these things, Andrew, and the resulting feedback or the uptake has been very, very bad, especially with trying to force people to get heat pumps in their houses, trying to force people into green cars, doing away with internal combustion engine cars by 2030 initially, and that's been kicked up to 2025. Bubbles are bursting a lot with these policies that the governments have thought would be election winners, none more so than the Labour Party, but the reality is slowly seeping through. And the same with digital ID. It's something that's pushed through as a convenience. It'll make you safer. It's for your own good. It's to make us all safer. But I think people are seeing through it because of shows like this and because of a lot of alternative media outspokenness against this. We're calling it out for what it is, a simple method to control us to the nth degree. So it's going to be very hard to address that one in a positive light from any political party, let alone the Labour Party.
Yeah, interesting point. I mean, James, isn't the omission of the most transformative programs that affect our lives a sign that democracy is dead?
It is, yeah, absolutely, and this is a collusion between the politicians and the media, because the media, the legacy media, that is, not great stations like TNT, they're not asking the right questions because there's two sets of policies that are on offer to the British public. The first set of policies, which won't make hardly any difference to our lives, they're the ones that are being debated, and yet the big ones, CBDCs, digital ID, net zero, all of these. We haven't got a choice. We've got the Uni Party that have both signed up to the same policies. And so the media and the politicians are all playing along, and we're just not going to talk about it because there is no choice to be had.
Yeah, it is really interesting, isn't it? Because I think I made this point before. I think the politicians seem to have a total disregard or respect for the electorate, and people care about those issues, and they want to hear how people would vote, what sort of suggestions there might be, because then they can take part in that discussion. Why do you think they're being excluded? Why are the politicians excluding the electorate from that discussion, Rick?
Because a lot of the people that are the electorate will talk and say things how they are, and that does not go down particularly well when you're trying to push one agenda and say that there's a great uptake from the public, and then you talk to the public and you find a lot of dissenting voices in there. Obviously, it doesn't do you any favors when it comes to the propaganda that you're trying to put out there. So you'll find selected people are chosen to comment on certain political issues that'll very much back up whatever the current party line is. Very, very rare, Andrew, that you get these days a completely random selection of voices from the great unwashed, the general public, to talk about what our politicians are putting forward. It's all about selection. It's all about that careful selection here.
Yeah, it is interesting. When we talk about selection, we've got the TV debates, as you know, been a key part of general election campaigns since 2010. You might remember Gordon Brown and David Cameron and Nick Clegg took part in the first ones. Well, Rishi Sunak and Sir Keir Starmer are going to be going head-to-head in their first televised debate of the general election on the 4th of June. So next week's time, we'll all be tuning in for that. This will just be a pantomime, won't it, James?
Yeah, of course it will, for the very reasons that we've just discussed. The topics that will come up will be all of the things which they tell us are important, but actually the fundamental things which were going to matter to people's lives over the next 5 years. We're not going to get a debate on that because both parties are signed up to the same agenda. Starmer's already said that he prefers Davos to Westminster. Westminster is just a talking shop, he says, and he wants to work with people in Davos, in the WEF, who will get things done. That's the reality of it, Andrew. And like I said, this is a collusion between the media and our politicians to avoid any topics which they have no choice over. Even if Starmer wanted to do something different, he can't because he reports to the globalists.
Yeah, I say it's a pantomime. They can all shout out, "Where's your career? It's behind you." They can work on that sort of basis. Let's look at it realistically. People talk about the rise of reform, and that's suddenly become very popular. I know lots of the key people in there. David Bull's a very good friend, and we know Richard Tyson and Ben as well. All of them are very interesting. Are any candidates discussing reality, do you reckon, Rick?
I have been speaking to some reform candidates on Locked and Loaded over the past few weeks, and the overwhelming impression I got, and one of them actually backed it up to me, was Andrew, maybe speaking out loud, was he said, listen, effectively he viewed, and I also view reform as a large group of independents that are operating under the banner of reform. So you have a party led up by Richard Tice. A lot of people, the vast majority of the young candidates in that party, don't agree with him on many policies. For example, his stance on Ukraine, the ongoing support for the war in Ukraine. The structure of the party is questionable. Ben Habib and Tice disagree on many things as well. So what I'm seeing is a party that's divided almost within itself. They're not dictating what everybody can say and believe, but at the same time, what's that old saying that a house divided itself against itself will fall, and great will be the fall of it. You need unity in there, and I'm not seeing any unity when it comes to reform. And I believe, I believe what any potential they had is being squandered under any lack of cohesiveness. Andrew, that's my take on reform.
No, interesting. What do you think of reform, James? Do you reckon they've got any chance at all?
Well, of course, I've stood with Reform. I was a Brexit Party MEP and later stood for Reform in the Welsh elections. Reform have got some good people. They have Ben Habib in particular, and there's a few other candidates which they've got, which I've got a lot of time for, a lot of credibility. But the party itself, as Rick has already alluded to, doesn't have any democracy about it. It is essentially a limited company. There are no members to the party. So, if the members want to get rid of a leader, or if they want to vote in certain policies, there is no structure for doing that. And I think this will be the undoing for Reform, because the problem they've got is because they haven't got members, they haven't got engagement at constituency level. So they bring in these new candidates for every election. A lot of them have never been in politics before. They don't know what they're doing. They don't have support locally. And to win elections, I've been in a few now, and to win elections, you need boots on the ground. You need an army in your constituency, and they're just not doing that because they haven't got the engagement. Why would you go and support an organisation that you don't have any skin in the game with? That's the problem, I think, that Reform have got. And I'm quite happy, Andrew, to put a bet on today. They will not get one person elected in July.
Yeah, it is interesting because that poll fairly recently, it was predicting that the Tories would get under 100 seats. They were thinking that Reform might get 50, but I think you could be right. Now, have you yourself? Can I ask you, James? Have you yourself decided if you're going to stand?
I'm thinking about it very carefully at the moment. Yeah, I think
you're sounding like Trump. I'll give it careful consideration, very careful consideration.
Yeah, there is a party that I've got a lot of time for that I'm in talks with. They want me to stand for them. I'm not ready to reveal which party that is yet, but I think I am going to stand. Yeah.
Oh, brilliant. There you go. You heard it here first on the Muckrakers. He will be standing. We're not sure which party. Well, one person we're not sure which party is Diane Abbott, and we're going to be talking about her after these messages.
Our beautiful world is changing, withering, dying by the hands of those who don't value nature, even though we all depend on it for life itself. But there is hope. Together with caring friends, the Nature Conservancy can restore our lands, heal our waters, and save our wildlife with big solutions only nature can provide. But every day we lose more of the places we love, and we urgently need to save endangered lands, waters, and wild species. The actions we take today will determine the tomorrow we leave to our children and grandchildren. The water they drink, the air they breathe, the beauty they experience. To learn more about how you can help protect and conserve our beautiful world, visit nature.org today.
Hi. I'm your retirement fear. But don't be scared. You're still in pre-retirement.
Does that mean I have more time to plan?
Precisely. Here, this is pretirement.org.
Retirement savings options? Potential tax breaks?
Move.
This isn't scary. I'm doing it.
You got this.
Visit thisispretirement.org for free resources to help you customize your action plan.
From national security to global corruption, this is the Muckrakers on today's News Talk, TNT.
Welcome to the home of free speech. This is TNT, and this is the Muckrakers with me, Andrew Eborn, and two titans from TNT, joined by the wonderful Rick Munn and James Freeman, always a pleasure to have you on this Thursday. It's been a joy over the last couple of weeks. I know all sorts of exciting developments are going to be happening next week. Other voices, and it's wonderful to see the chat, and thank you for all those comments in the chat. I'd love to get you on the show. I like all the suggestions as well, some of which I think are probably physically impossible, but thank you for those anyway. I want you to give us a call. These are the numbers, and this is how you can do it.
This is the way we're going to be heard.
From the U.S. and Canada, call 1-888-201-6425. From the U.K., call 033-0024-1026. And from Australia and New Zealand, call 1-800-670-310. Free speech is alive and well on today's News Talk, TNT Radio.
So free speech is indeed alive and very, very well here on the Muckrakers. Now, Diane Abbott, she always makes the headline. I've got a lot of sympathy for Diane Abbott. I like her. She said she's going to stand in the general election by any means possible. What do you make of that, James?
I think that she's been treated very unfairly by the Labour Party, which I think is partly a purge of the left-leaning members or politicians within the party. I think her comments weren't that anti-Semitic, if I'm absolutely honest. The Labour Party does, by the way, use the same definition, which has just been put in law in the US. It's actually defined by the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance. And if you read that definition and examples of anti-Semitism, it means that essentially you can't even criticize, or it's very difficult to criticize Israel without having the finger pointed at you. And I think Israel is very, very deserving of a lot of criticism at the moment for what it's doing in the Middle East. So I do think this is part of a purge or attempted purge by Keir Starmer. And clearly he's rowing back now because Diane Abbott, I think, has got a lot of support within the base of the party, the members. So I think she will be standing, and I think she will be standing with the party, which wasn't the plan, by the way. But dear old flip-flopper Sir Keir Starmer, I think, will allow her to stand.
And what do you think, Rick?
Well, here's the thing, Andrew. She's obviously a very polarizing character. Some people love her, some people hate her. And personally speaking, I like people's attitudes, whether or not I agree with them politically or not, or what they've done in the past or not. You know, who can cast the sin? Let he who is without sin cast the first stone, as they go. And if you open up all our cupboards, you'll find a few skeletons in there too. So setting aside the person of Diane Abbott just for 1 minute, I like the attitude. She's effectively sticking her fingers up to the party and saying, you know what, to hell with it. I am going to run in this election one way or another, by hook or by crook, whether or not you give me an endorsement or not. So I can't fault her for the attitude here, Andrew. There's an article here that this was referenced in. It said now her actions, the actions towards her being linked to a wider purge of the left, something even Tony Blair did not do with Chingford candidate Faiza Sahin finding out last night that she was barred as well. So I think effectively what's happened is this has drawn more attention to an issue that would have blown over anyway. She said her apologies, she made herself clear, just move on with things. Now it's shining the spotlight back in this one again, which is not a positive one when it comes to the Labour Party and their stance on her, I believe. So maybe they should have just let proverbial sleeping dogs lie with this one. Just let it roll into history. That's what Darren Denslow, who used to come on here, used to say. Today's news is tomorrow's chip paper. You know, we'll be eating our chips out of it tomorrow night. The same thing could be said with this Diane Abbott story. Wrap the chips up with it, Keir. Don't keep flogging the old dead horse.
Well, there's no way to refer to Diane like that, but I work on that sort of basis. The old dead horse. But no, you're absolutely right.
The story, by the way, I meant the story was a dead.
I know what you meant.
But he's flogging that.
I know exactly what you meant. So interestingly, though, Jeremy Corbyn, who we spoke about on the show yesterday, who the whole press seemed to have been sort of ostracized and gone against him, he suggested that Keir Starmer is trying to purge the left wing of the Labour Party. Do you think that's the case, James?
Yes, of course it is. Under Corbyn, look, whether you like Corbyn or you don't like him, it's clear that he wasn't controlled by the globalists. He wasn't controlled by the elite. That was the reason that he was ousted. He took the party to a place which they didn't want. It wasn't part of this globalist plan that all the politicians are signed up to. So, I think Keir Starmer, he's a globalist. He wants to take Labour more towards the centre ground and away from its traditional roots as the Workers' Party. So yes, I think he is trying to purge the left of the party.
Yeah, what do you think, Rick?
Yeah, well, obviously he sat down with his think tank and his so-called advisors. No doubt they've got together around a table somewhere and said, okay, what's the best way forward? What can we do to maximize our chances here? Well, that's an unsavory character. Probably best we don't have her in the party, or he needs to be silenced, or she needs to go. They've done this thinking that it was the best strategy. But again, I'm a big believer in once something has revealed itself and it has settled down and it's in history, even though it's only a week or two, and they say a week is a long time in politics, you're better to be forward thinking in this one. And effectively it's shining a light on Starmer's government that they're purging out people. Why? Do they only want yes men? Do they only want nodding dogs in that party that will bow and scrape to whatever Starmer says? It looks like that's the impression that's being given. And, the impression I get of Keir Starmer is, he's there's not a lot of substance to that man. If you've seen him, somebody mentioned him punching a punch bag earlier on this week. He's quite stocky. You think he would have a pack a punch, maybe, that guy, but he's weak. He's limp, like a little lettuce leaf, like Rishi was last week when he was standing in the rain, a little limp lettuce leaf. So I don't know what. I'm just going off on one. I'm not a big fan of.
Oh no, you always love your lettuce leaf references.
I don't eat lettuce, but I like to call people limp lettuce leaf. So there's.
Oh, I realise. I love an avalanche of alliteration. It's always got to be good. But whenever you think of the lettuce, you always think. I mean, people are wonderful at dismissing people, aren't they? It's Liz Truss and the famous paper where they had iceberg lettuce and Liz Truss, which one's going to last the longest? And the lettuce won. I remember it was working on that sort of basis. But I think the reality is that people know Keir Starmer is trying to change the Labour Party. He's trying to get away from the bits that he felt was untenable and unpalatable for the electorate, and therefore he's taking out what he classifies as those elements of the left that basically were causing problems. And he includes Corbyn in that, and whatever his support might be for Diane Abbott, I think that's a similar sort of thing, isn't it, James?
A similar thing to what his support with Diane Abbott.
Well, no, in terms of turning around and saying that we want to get away from things and elements within the party that might be unpalatable. Do you think that he's trying to tar everybody with the same brush?
I think he is. So like I said, I mean, look, my view is that Keir Starmer wants to take the Labour Party away from where it was, not because of the policies that it was, Corbyn was very, very popular. The actual number of Labour members grew to its record under him. It's gone down lots since he's left. So they were actually... those policies were actually very, very popular with Labour members. Look, what Keir Starmer is doing is not sort of making it more palatable for voters. He's making the party more palatable for the globalists, essentially. He's changing the party to align it with the globalist agenda. And Corbyn and Diane Abbott and others on the left are not part of that. They're outspoken. They're not under control. That was why Corbyn essentially was ousted, because nobody could control him. And they absolutely feared him getting his hands into government. So I think that's what's going on. It's not about necessarily making it the party more palatable for voters. It's making it more palatable for the globalists.
Yeah, it is interesting. I mean, but also, one of the things that destroys parties is internal bickering. What would the solution to that be, Rick?
Get rid of all the bickers. I was reading a piece last night about some prison in Romania that was operating between 1949 and 1951, and they brought people in and they tortured them and they beat the dissent clean out of them. Now, of course, I'm not advocating we go back into communist brainwashing here, but hey, hard to argue with the fact that it was very effective, Andrew. So I'm saying that very tongue in cheek, of course. But listen, does it not all boil down to leadership? If you can't control your party and you can't stop the petty bickering and infighting within your party, are people not going to look at you saying you can't even run your own political party here? How are you going to run a country full of bickering and angry and agitated people? So I think how this is handled on a party level is going to be reflective in people's perception, Andrew, on how he may run a country. If he can't run the party, how the hell is he going to run the country? And I think the answer to that is he's not.
Yeah, it's a very interesting point. I always say that elections follow the same pattern, and you have all these wonderful scandals that emerge. And it was 2017 that fake news was the word, well, 2 words of the year. In 2023, the Collins word, or 2 words, was AI, artificial intelligence. If you combine the both of those, you're going to get so many fake images, so many fake videos, so many fake audio recordings coming out. And we've been unpacking those around the world in Andrew Eborn's Fake or Fact, and looking at some of those and how that AI is being used as a tool for basically spreading misinformation and disinformation. What's really interesting is looking at the chat is how many people are totally in support of AI. They're turning around and saying, look, actually, they should be using this. Doctors should be harnessing it, and so on and so forth. Do you think this could be the silver bullet for a party who comes out and says, let's do this, as Rishi was trying to say last time, let's build a country based on AI, let's punch above our weight? Is that going to be the silver bullet to help them win? What do you think, Rick?
No, I think it'll be a stake through the heart of those people that are trying to win, because as much as AI is being put forward as being, the possible solution to so many problems, the amount of skepticism around it, the amount of abuse that it could be, used for, I think people are extremely wary, Andrew. And when you bear in mind the last 3 to 4 years, the lockdowns, the scandemic, the vaccine campaigns, the lies, the safe and the effective, the government corruption and the scandal, hard to believe anything that the government would put forward, or any prospective government would put forward, as the way forward is actually the best thing for the people. So I believe they're in an uphill battle to try and convince the public that AI is the way forward.
No, interesting. I mean, I see Stephen Crossley has been in support of it. He's sort of saying, he's talked about in the chat about his own wife's situation, and saying that actually from a doctor's point of view, if they'd shared information, if they'd had access to lots of information through AI, it could have extended her life, maybe even have saved it. What are your views, James?
I think there are applications where AI can help. But look, let's be clear. If we're talking about whether it's going to be that silver bullet for the next government, well, all of the experts are talking about 40% of the workforce being laid off over the next 5 to 6 years because of AI. Where's the plan to solve that gap? I think I'm suspicious that the government just want to bring in universal basic income for people and basically have more of the population under the control of the government. So I think, look, AI, like all technologies, there are good positive aspects to it, but I think there are clear risks as well. And just, running ahead with AI without thinking properly about the problems that it will create as well as the solutions it will solve. I think, I don't hear that coming from government at the moment.
No, you're absolutely right. I always say that AI is our greatest human achievement, but potentially the biggest existential threat. Well, that's all we've got time for today here on the Muckrakers. Thank you very much, my special guests, James Freeman and Rick Munn. And thank you for all of your brilliant comments. Do keep them coming. And Peter Andrew Eborn, I'll see you same time, same place on the Muckrakers here on TNT. See you tomorrow. Take care. Bye.
To hear a replay of this hour, go to episodes at tntradio.live. Now, TNT Radio News.
With your hourly news brief, I'm Matt Boyland. The US is facing increased pressure to reassess its military support for Israel after it was revealed Washington supplied the bombs used in Sunday's deadly airstrike on Rafah. Israeli warplanes targeted what the IDF says was a Hamas compound, less than 200 metres from a camp housing displaced Palestinians. Fire consumed the encampment, killing at least 45 civilians and wounding hundreds more, mostly women and children. The scale of the destruction triggering global outrage, and new images from the blast site show the remnants of what is believed to be an American-made GBU-39 warhead with a payload of 17 kilos. The serial number traced back to a weapons manufacturer